Hey there, Villo. It's Cole. I am joined again today by my friend Angela, Dr. Angela Axelrod, who is a school psychologist. And we are going to be talking about something that I think is so interesting for families, and we see it in so many different ways. But talking through the transitions that we experience in life, some of them the simple ones, and some of them the more complex. So thank you so much for joining me, Angela.
Thanks.
Okay, so in your work as a school psychologist, this isn't an educational issue, but it must land at your doorstep basically all the time.
It does. It does. We have kids that are experiencing changes in their lives, whether they be changes that are a little unusual, like the death of a family member or divorce, or serious illness of a family member. And then we have changes and transitions that all students experience, such as going from elementary to middle school or going from middle school to high school. So we try to work with all of those students on the different changes that they're experiencing.
What are some of the more common maybe emotions or behaviors or things that you see play out in some of the more standard transitions, the school to school, or I move from here to there, some of those more, I don't want to say simple, but more common experiences?
Sure. There's anxiety and apprehension, and that is very typical to have a student in fifth grade start having some anxiety about the transition to middle school in sixth grade. I currently have a fifth grader who will be making a transition to sixth grade next year, and I sense a little anxiety in him, and that is, I would expect that.
Sure.
I also see, often though, I see the parents having more anxiety than the kids with those, what I would call typical transitions. And I think that we spend a lot of time actually reassuring the parents that everything is going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that I think the first day of middle school or the first day of kindergarten or the first day of high school is often more difficult for the parents to go through than it is for the actual child to go through. So while we spend time working with the kids to prepare them for that transition, we also work with the parents on that transition too, because sometimes they need more support than the kids do.
Sure. In sort of the other realm of transitions, I mean, my assumption would be that there's a whole range of behaviors and emotions that you see, but are there kind of typical sets of things that people experience that you see in kids?
Sure. So when we have a student that's experiencing kind of a dramatic shift in their life, whether it's their parents are going through a divorce or they're moving, you'll see some common symptoms, the symptoms of anxiety, such as being a little more irritable or crying a little bit more easily, having anxiety, outwardly, like actually worrying, talking about being worried, changes in, sleeping habits are common in kids who are going through those transitions. And some of that is expected and is short term.
Okay.
Where we get concerned is when those behaviors stretch on a little longer and when they really start to interfere with daily functioning. So changes in eating patterns or changes in behavior patterns where they're having difficulty concentrating in school and we see grades slipping, or we see dramatic changes in their sleeping habits that then affect their ability to function throughout the day. And that's when we really want to make sure that we're intervening when those symptoms become disruptive to the child's ability to kind of get through their day.
Okay. In your experience, are those symptoms that you're speaking about, are those things that like the teacher's noticing, or is it more often that like a parent notices and brings it to you? I mean, how are you kind of finding out the information?
Both. Sometimes the parents will notice those behaviors more, that a lot of children are able to what we say, kind of hold it together during the school day. And the school day is often really busy and structured.
Sure.
And so it's a good opportunity for the kids to kind of get their mind off of what's going on at home or what's going on outside. And then the parent really gets hit with it at 3:30 when they walk through the door, because all of a sudden it's looking at them, it's right in front of them, and they don't really have anything to take their mind off of it. So it's not unusual to have a student not show any symptoms at school, but then at home to have a lot of symptoms. But we do have kids that we can definitely tell something's going on just by the way that they are presenting themselves at school, behaviorally, emotionally, academically even.
Yeah.
And those are things that we look into and really try to work with the family for solutions.
Okay. Do you see, in terms of the behaviors that are exhibited, do you see a shift from like younger years? Are there more common things, like if you have a kindergartner who's maybe going through the loss of a parent, for instance, or some, major life shift? Are the behaviors you're going to see or get highlighted in that area significantly different than you might see like in a preteen or a little bit older child?
Yeah, you would see, different ages of development will demonstrate different symptoms. So in younger children, you will see more, tantruming. That's more common. You typically really wouldn't see a 16-year-old have a tantrum, and maybe see more turning inward and depression and quiet shutting down behaviors in older students. But you certainly could see older students engage in risky behaviors or in what we call externalizing behaviors too. So I would almost say that it's more dependent on the individual child and how they react to these transitions. And often children in the same family react very differently.
Sure.
So they may both be going through a difficult time and experiencing it in different ways, and then showing those symptoms in different ways.
Yeah. Okay.
So it really depends on the student. I think that it's important for teachers and parents to realize, is this a deviation from how this child usually behaves? So do we see a student who's usually outgoing become more withdrawn, or do we see a student who's more withdrawn all of a sudden showing a lot of outward symptoms? Then those would both be things that would be concerning. So just dramatic shifts in behavior, however, from the way that this child usually behaves.
Yeah, from usual operation. Okay. When a kid is going through these types of transitions, I guess I would like to talk about both the more typical and the more challenging. But do you see typical patterns? Like, is there kind of a wave or a stage that kids usually go through as they're experiencing?
Sometimes there can be some kids that react right away to a change, and then they process it quickly and they're able to recover a little quickly, and they're moving on. Some kids, that process takes a little bit longer and they may seem okay at first, and then as time goes on, then you'll see some of those symptoms pop up. So it really depends on the child and the situation and how they handle it. But I would say there's no one kind of correct way to go through these transitions. So some kids will show everything up front, and some kids it'll be a little more delayed, and it's really about that impact on their functioning.
Okay.
But yeah, it's very different for each student how they experience things. But there can be waves. There can be good days and then bad days, where you have days where you think, oh, we've gotten over this, that this is great, and then a week later you see some backsliding. So that's typical too. All of these things resolve themselves in different ways, and it's not really a linear process from from point A to point B.
Speaking from my own personal experience as an adult, my experience has been that there can be quite a delay between like an actual experience and then any kind of really thought process or internalizing about that experience. I mean, like a year or two sometimes.
Yes.
I mean, it can be a long period of time. Do you see that in kids, or does it seem like their reaction is a little more closer to the event?
I think the younger the child, the you would see less drawn out symptoms. The older we get, the more we kind of have all these different cognitive processes and thinking processes, and it just looks different in older students and older in adults too. So for us as adults, sometimes it's more difficult for us to get over things or to process through things. And kids are, and I say this a lot, and I know that other people have said this a lot too, but it is true that sometimes our children can be more resilient than we are.
Yeah.
And younger kids can have a way of being able to kind of move their way through a transition easier than the adults in the family can. So, so yeah, I would say that you're right on with that, it's that younger kids sometimes are able to get through things much faster than the older people in the household.
Okay. When you think about a major life shift that's happening in a family, so the kid and the parent are experiencing this shift together. I mean, just in my own mind, that seems like a really complicated process just from the sheer number of people that are experiencing that. Are there tips, tricks that can help when really the whole household might be experiencing a big shift that can help support the kid?
Yes.
At a time when a parent's experiencing it too.
Yes. So first I would say that kids almost always look to their parents to see how they should be reacting to a situation.
Okay.
A lot of times kids don't really understand the change, and they will look to you, a parent, to see how are you reacting to this. I can think of times where my children, haven't been crying, but they've seen me cry, and then they start crying because they've seen that, that something triggers
this
in
is
them.
Sad. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yes, this is a sad situation. So, so I think that it's important for us to be aware of our own feelings about whatever's happening in our lives, and then how we are modeling our reactions to our kids. And a lot of it is, depending on the transition, it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to be sad around your kids. It's about how you're adapting and showing your kids, modeling for them how to respond to this situation. Again, they're going to look to you to see how you're doing. And kids really do want their parents to be happy, and they want their parents to feel good. And so it makes them feel good to see that their parents are feeling good. For the vast majority of kids, they will look to us to see that things are okay. So another important piece of that is to reassure the children that things, no matter what has happened, that we're going to get through this, that things are going to be okay. It may not be tomorrow, may not be next week, but eventually we're going to get there.
Get there, yeah.
I think another thing that is, another variable in that is the reason for the change, or if the transition is going in a positive direction or a negative one. So there's some transitions where a family will be moving, for instance, to another state, but they're moving because of a great job opportunity. And so everybody's lives are kind of going to be enhanced by this transition. And those transitions are easier, even though there might still be anxiety in the parents about moving and a new job and things like that. That transition's typically not going to cause as much grief as a transition where a parent has lost a job and now the family has to move out of the house, or has to move to another community because something negative happened. So that also can play a role in how the whole family handles the transition, if it's a positive move or if it's a negative move.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
As I guess this could be true for any age child, but as they're experiencing both types of these transitions, what are the role of friends? So the people outside of the household that...
Sure. I think depending on the age, I think that those peer relationships are more important as the child gets older, especially for teenagers. They will rely on their friends a little bit more for social and emotional support. So there is... It's certainly, if a child has positive peer relationships in their life, it's going to become even more important that they rely on those relationships when they're navigating a change. For younger students, they may be attached to their friends or connected with their friends, but I think those friendships are more difficult to replace if they're lost.
Sure.
And they can rely on them more for emotional support. Younger kids will typically still look to adults for emotional support. Teachers, not just parents though. So teachers, coaches, other relatives, grandparents are hugely, can play a huge role in a young child's life in navigating these transitions. Aunts, uncles, older cousins.
Do you see it as something almost to recommend or as a benefit where, let's say the whole family is experiencing some kind of major shift? Mm-hmm. Is it a good idea on the behalf of the parents to say, like, okay, well, once a week, I mean, if this opportunity were available, once a week you're going to go to Grandma and Grandpa's for an afternoon and sort of maybe make additional efforts to foster some of those bonds? Or is it just like what organically happens should happen?
I think that if that's I think anything you can do to make this experience a positive one or put a positive spin on it, what you really want to do is keep that, is have as many positive interactions and experiences as you can during a difficult time, because that's going to only help a child feel hope that they're going to get through this, and help your family as well. So I think anything that you can reach out to make this time be positive is beneficial.
Okay.
And I also would say, it's important to not be afraid of these changes either. Because I do see a lot of kids who, as parents, we are very, very afraid to have our kids experience any upset or disappointment. And I understand that 100% as a parent. It kills me when I see my own children upset and disappointed and sad. But I'll blame pop psychology. I'll blame my own profession for this a little bit, where we kind of have demonized any disappointment and made it a scary thing for people to have to go through pain and disappointment and sadness. But it's also really good for us to experience that. And it's really good for your kids to experience that. We kind of call that emotional inoculation, where you're kind of practicing being upset or being disappointed, because, the analogy is you don't want to see the curveball for the first time in the game. You want to practice hitting the curveball a few times first. And the childhood is the time to kind of practice that, because we all know as adults you're going to get thrown a few curveballs.
Totally.
So it's something, I don't want to say lean into the disappointment or the pain, but it's one way to think about it is this is going to make, when we come out of this, it will make us a little bit more resilient and it'll make us stronger. And that's an important lesson. We don't want to shield our kids from these changes or these disappointments. I know that when we talk about, for instance, the transition to middle school, how can we ease this transition? How can we make this be a very positive transition? And I tell parents, you know what? We're going to put some things into place. We're going to have some shadow days. We're going to have some talking to some of these middle school teachers. But you know what? It might feel a little yucky at first when you go into that middle school for the first time, or this new school that we've just moved to. Yeah. But you know what? That's okay. We don't need to clear the path of obstacles for our kids. It's good for them to have to experience some of those. Right. Obviously, we don't want our kids to experience, I'm not talking about trauma, but talking about, there's a difference between having a traumatic event and then a difference between and just a disappointing life event. Sure. Disappointments we can get over and we can move past. Right. And that's what I feel like our kids maybe need a little bit more of, is experiencing a little bit of disappointment and learning how to bounce back from that. It's a really important, valuable skill to learn. And so that's to try to put a positive spin on these transitions. That would be the positive spin, that, hey, these things are difficult. These what I would call just little tricky transitions are difficult, but ultimately they're going to make your child stronger and better prepare them to be an adult. Because really, I mean, we're raising children, but we're really raising adults too. Right. So we have to teach them. These are great opportunities to teach our kids skills, coping skills, and to teach them resiliency and
Totally.
the word grit I've heard a lot, but
Yeah.
to teach them those behaviors and skills, that's
Yeah.
invaluable, and these are great opportunities.
To experience it, yeah. My mind is sort of spinning from the things that you were just mentioning, because there's so many concepts all kind of wrapped up in that are so important. And one thing that comes to mind is how you mentioned how, as parents, we are afraid of what our children might experience. And one thing that we are committed to with Willow is to get rid of the fear.
Yes.
Because it is, first of all, most of the time not true.
Yes.
And second of all, it is a blockade to all that could be.
Yes. It's a huge barrier to growth when we're afraid. And I see a lot of parents, and I've been guilty of this myself at times.
Yeah, we're not exercises in perfection.
Of parenting from a place of fear.
Totally.
Afraid of, I have to have my kid do this or else this is going to happen. Well, chances are, if you're providing a loving, warm, caring home and supportive, then you really are doing 95% of what you should be doing. And we don't need to be so afraid. And again, that's, I think that we could let ourselves off the hook a little bit for that. But you're absolutely right. When we're afraid to have our children or ourselves experience these things, it really prevents us from experiencing the growth that we could.
All the good stuff that's on the other side, for sure. And then the other concept that comes to mind is something I had the opportunity to talk to your husband about, Dr. Mike Axelrod, which is the time in concept, which the reason it came to mind was because as you're navigating these challenges, I think it can be easy, and I'm just speaking from my own experience, I don't know this to be true, but it can be easy to really be stuck thinking about that negativity when there's still all these opportunities to experience positive time together, whether that's just like a quick snuggle on the couch or an opportunity to talk about, what the dinner plan is for the weekend, instead of, oh gosh, there's this problem, let's talk more about it. Oh gosh, what happened today regarding this problem? Yes. So both of those things came to mind.
No. He's a smart one, that Dr. Mike Axelrod. I agree. So that time in concept should be used during this. We were thinking about, so here's an example of a family that's just made a move. And so, if anybody who's moved knows that the day after you move somewhere, you've got boxes everywhere. Your house is in complete disarray. You're probably a little bit stressed. No one's come and hooked up the cable yet. The internet's not working. You don't know your neighbors. You're having this moment of this day of panic, and nothing is going right. And it's important to take time and say, all of this will get done eventually. Nothing bad is going to happen that this box isn't opened yet.
Yeah.
Let's go down the street and grab ice cream cones and play at this playground that maybe will be our new favorite place.
Yeah.
And make time for this positiveness. And humor, too, I think is so important in these times of transition. That can be such a healing force and can help kids, too, and to make it fun. So it is important to incorporate as much time in as possible and positive experiences in these. And it'll help you too as the adult. Sometimes you got to fake it till you make it. Maybe you don't feel like going out for ice cream and you really just want to get these boxes unpacked, or you really want to just have a moment to feel bad. But I get that, but I think it's important to carve out some time to just do something positive that day.
Not be about that, for sure. All right, so let's say there has been, actually it could be either type of transition, I'm guessing you could experience, but let's say a kid is experiencing a transition and things are not like moving along either a healthy path or a productive path, a path where like we're making some kind of progress.
Yeah.
What are the kind of signs that you might see where, oh gosh, we might need some kind of an intervention or something more for this student?
So if it's gone on to a point where we're still having, like you've seen a change in behavior, change in sleeping habits, eating habits, school habits, behavior, and it's gone on for quite a while and you feel like this is still not my child, then I think it's time to reach out and to try to to get some help outside of your household. And I think if many of the issues are happening in the school setting, the school counselor is a great place to start with that, because they'll be able to help navigate those school changes. And we do see some kids, for example, that really struggle with the jump from elementary to middle school. And by, the end of October, beginning of November, if we're still not really settled into middle school and we're still coming home every day crying or really unhappy, then it's time to get the school involved to figure out how we're going to move forward and make this a more positive experience for everybody.
Yeah.
Same thing with if you've gone through a transition at home and you're just not feeling like, maybe there's been a divorce and, 8 months later you still have a teenager that won't come out of their bedroom, or that is lost weight or gained weight, and the eating habits have changed, or they're not showing interest in things that they used to show interest in, or their friendships are suffering, then I would reach out to a mental health professional who can help you through that. I would say that, especially for younger kids, but even with older kids, I would want to work with a mental health professional who's willing to work with the parents as well. I get a little wary when they just want to work with the kid, because it really is something that the family should be working on together.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of people who want, in their best, the best of intentions, but want to have the kid see a mental health professional to fix the child. And really the solution, longer term solutions, come from fixing the whole family
the dynamic
and helping the parents understand how they can work with that child every day to get the child in a better place. So, and then with issues of divorce or death in the family, I would look for a mental health professional that specializes in those specific, completely different experience. Okay. And as mental health professionals, we know that we have strengths and weaknesses, and there are some issues that I am not great at dealing with, and I would refer those to somebody else who has more experience in that area. And then there's other things that I'm better at handling. So I always encourage parents to not give up. If one mental health professional doesn't really work out, look for another one, and really ask when you are interviewing these people or making an appointment, does this person have experience dealing with, and then whatever that specific item, because that's going to be very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So mental health professionals, the guidance counselor, are there any other specific professional people that come to mind that parents should really think about reaching out to?
Physicians, if they're sometimes they are good places to refer on, especially if there's physical symptoms. I would always rule out that there's not something else going on
actually happening.
And pediatricians will tell you that they're often put in a mental health professional role, and so that they are sometimes great places to refer to start, and then refer out to somebody else. Social workers can be, especially if there is an event in the family's life where, let's say, a family member has lost a job and there is a financial burden on the family. Sometimes social workers are able to connect families with resources and get involved, help the family get different supports from other community agencies. They kind of act as a caseworker in a way, and they really have very specific knowledge in that. In some communities, they have, if you have a child that's experienced a lot of different distress, like in school, and they're are struggling at home, and maybe have some other things going on, many counties use what they call like a community support team model, where there'll be a caseworker who coordinates all the different people who are supporting that child, the school, medical community, their therapist, and that way it's kind of referred to sometimes as wraparound services. So that's another angle to take if things are, there's a lot of support out there. Sometimes it does take some digging, and you may have some false starts in trying to find support. And I would just encourage people to keep going.
Are there any circumstances, like, let's say you're going to be getting divorced or something where there's going to be like a really major life shift? Do you ever recommend seeking some of those services in advance of? Like, if if maybe dad's really sick and dad is not going to make it, do you ever seek something beforehand, or is it really the reaction after that you're...
I don't think it hurts to seek something out beforehand. Many children won't end up needing additional support. The support from within the family or their friends is enough to get them through a difficult time. I don't think that there's no risk in seeking out support ahead of time. And the worst thing that happens is maybe there's a little bit of time wasted if this child really doesn't need the extra support. But I've never seen a situation where somebody looked for support ahead of time and then regretted it.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think being proactive is always positive.
Yeah.
You're not going to create problems.
Well, and kind of maybe sets a tone. I mean, not that you have to do that, but could also set the tone for...
Yes.
We know this thing's happening. We might have certain experiences around it. Let's kind of make a plan for it.
Well, and if a student, really, if you can try to catch some of these issues early before they get more pronounced, it's much easier to deal with them when they're little problems than when they get bigger.
Sure.
So I think that, again, if I knew that one of my children was going to go through kind of a traumatic event, and like a death of a family member or impending divorce or something, I would reach out ahead of time and put some supports into place. And if they didn't end up needing them,
sure,
that's okay.
Great.
That's great. But I would feel better myself knowing that at least that we had set the stage for...
Sure.
And that we had built a layer of support in.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think, and the other thing to be mindful of is to take care of your own mental health during these issues. Sometimes I've seen parents where they're so worried about their child, and we've had to have difficult conversations with the parents about, okay, so you're really worried about your kid, but I'm actually more worried about you.
Sure. Well, and it ends up being a deflection, right?
Exactly. Like you can't take care of these kids until you get yourself in a place where you're okay. And so make sure to take care of yourself too, and get help for yourself and seek support for yourself in these issues. As parents, again, we put our kids first all the time. I understand that, but we also need to make sure we're taking care of
forgotten.
Exactly. We need to take care of ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, so those are kind of the professional resources. Are there any online resources or books or any of that kind of stuff that you find to be helpful resources in these departments?
I don't have anything specific. I think that it really depends on the very specific nature of what the student is going through. I think issues with school and transitions with schools, I always refer to a school counselor, school psychologist, just because they have unique knowledge about how schools work and about the school day. Schools are kind of these different places that adults don't really understand what happens all day long if you're not in it every day. So I do suggest working from that angle if there's a school issue.
Okay.
As far as grief support and support with divorce, I would start with local support groups and asking for support that way. And there are lots of various websites out there.
Yeah.
There's nothing that I specifically would recommend. The American Academy of Pediatrics is one that we always has good evidence-based information. The National Association of School Psychologists has many position papers and resources that then they link to other organizations, and they kind of vet those websites and organizations. So those are kind of my two starting places when I'm looking for resources in specific areas, because I know they've done the background work and they've kind of checked these out and given them their blessing.
Right. Okay. Anything else you think we need to know to support our kids through transitions, or just we do our best? And
No, I would also say one thing I didn't mention is that many people find comfort in their transitions also from their place of worship. So
Valid.
their church or pastor, synagogue, that can be another really good source of support. I've found that a lot of people who rely on those religious networks have found that that has been very helpful to them. So I don't want to leave that
Yeah,
piece
no, thank you for mentioning
that
that. It's
piece
totally a
out. I
valid,
forgot to
yeah,
mention that, but that can be another source of support and resources.
definitely. Fabulous. Thank you so much. I think you're going to help a lot of families kind of know how to navigate some of these